It seems like everywhere you look these days, things are a bit, well, shaky,
Yeah.
whether it's the economy throwing curveballs or politics just, feeling less and less predictable.
Right.
And today we're diving deep into a place that's facing like this really tangled web of challenges, Pakistan.
Yeah.
We've got a mix of perspectives here, some really personal stories, and then this like in-depth analysis from an academic journal.
It's a fascinating combination.
It is, and the mission here is to try to untangle these threads, figure out what are the core issues that Pakistan is up against.
Absolutely. And one thing that jumps out right away from those personal accounts, it's this overwhelming feeling of, I guess, powerlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this sense that the system is rigged, corruption is everywhere, and their voices just aren't being heard.
It's like a real disconnect between the people and the powers that be.
Exactly. And it really sets the stage for this academic article we have. It's called Regime Change in Pakistan 2022, Implications for Political and Economic Stability.
Okay, so right there in the title, they're linking political instability and economic problems.
Yeah, it's published in the Pakistan Journal of International Affairs. Pretty reputable source.
Got it.
And they're really zeroing in on everything that's happened since April 2022.
So very recent history.
Yeah, and what's interesting is they actually use the Arab Spring as an analogy.
Oh, wow.
Those uprisings, the protests, all that unrest.
Yeah.
And they're saying, look, similar dynamics are at play in Pakistan, and even in a democracy, this kind of uncertainty can really throw a wrench in the economy.
So they're not directly saying Pakistan's going to have an Arab Spring?
No, but they're highlighting that connection between political turmoil and economic instability.
Yeah, because, obviously businesses need some sense of predictability, right? To invest, to grow, to hire people.
Absolutely, and that's where their definition of political instability comes in. It's nuanced. It's not just about governments changing.
Okay, so how do they break it down?
They give us three main ways to think about it. And they're building on some earlier research from 2017 by a guy named Javed.
Okay.
So first, there's the straightforward, like how often does the government change? Right, regime change.
Okay, makes sense.
Then there's the level of political disorder, even violence within society.
So like protests turning violent, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and then crucially, how all of this instability impacts the country's economic growth.
Makes sense. So it's not just about who's in charge, it's about the whole like vibe, the atmosphere.
Exactly, the knock-on effects.
And speaking of change in government, the article really starts its analysis with the removal of Imran Khan.
Yeah, back in April 2022, that no confidence motion, big turning point.
Huge. April 10th, to be exact.
Right, and what followed was this wave of allegations from Khan, this narrative of a U.S.-led conspiracy.
Oh, right. I vaguely remember that.
He was claiming that the U.S. was working with Pakistani politicians, even the establishment, to oust him.
And his reason.
Well, he pointed to a couple things. His visit to Russia in February 2022, right before the invasion of Ukraine.
Oh, right. So kind of poking the bear.
Yeah, and then his refusal to let the U.S. military use bases in Pakistan for keeping an eye on Afghanistan.
So asserting Pakistani independence, I guess.
Exactly. And, the U.S. obviously denied any involvement.
Of course.
But what's fascinating is the article says a lot of the public actually bought into Khan's story.
Really? Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. Pakistan has a history with the U.S. There's some pre-existing distrust.
Yeah. There have been interventions, drone strikes, things like that.
Right. So it might have tapped into this existing sense of, like, national sovereignty being threatened.
And this is all feeding into Khan's popularity.
It seems so. The article suggests it gave him a real boost, even after he was out of office.
That's wild. It's not every day you see a prime minister get more popular after getting kicked out.
Yeah, it's pretty unprecedented in Pakistan's history. Really underlines how strongly people felt about all of this.
Definitely sets the stage for what comes next, which, if I remember correctly, is a lot of political maneuvering.
Oh, yeah, tons of it. And those upcoming elections, they were due by summer 2023, became a huge point of friction.
Okay, so we've got Khan's party, the PTI, pushing for early elections.
Right. They wanted to capitalize on that public support.
And on the other side, we have the PDM, the coalition that replaced Khan, resisting those calls.
Yeah, they were trying to consolidate their power, but they definitely faced some setbacks along the way.
Like what?
Well, the article mentions they lost some key special elections in Punjab.
Ow.
Yeah, and then there was that Supreme Court decision. They reinstated a Khan supporter as chief minister.
So the judiciary getting involved? Classic Pakistan.
It's a recurring theme. And then you've got the Election Commission of Pakistan, the ECP. They launched this investigation into the PTI's campaign funding.
Oh.
Yeah, and there was a real possibility that Khan himself could be disqualified from running for office.
So even more uncertainty, more fuel for the fire.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, you have this whole saga with the PTI legislators resigning from the National Assembly.
Oh, right. I remember that. It was like mass resignations.
Yeah, initially the Speaker of the Assembly seemed hesitant to accept them.
But then?
Then suddenly he accepted them all at once, which raised some serious constitutional questions like, could you even do that?
Yeah. I remember people were saying it could end up in the courts.
Absolutely. And to make things even more confusing, Fawad Hussein, a PTI member, he actually said they'd go back to the National Assembly.
So they resign and then unresign.
Well, it seemed like their goal was to try to remove the opposition leader, and he claimed the government had lost its majority support.
So much political chess, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, and there's this quote in the article, someone said anonymously, it's like all these politicians are so busy fighting for their own interests.
Yeah, that they're forgetting about the country.
Exactly, especially with this looming economic crisis. It's a pretty damning indictment.
Before we get to the economy, I think we need to rewind a bit to that constitutional crisis in early April 2022.
Oh yeah, April 3rd to 10th, that was a wild week, like a roller coaster.
It was. So you have the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly rejecting that no confidence motion.
Citing Article 5, foreign interference, very unusual move.
For our listeners who aren't familiar with Pakistani law, Article 5 is about loyalty to the state.
Right, so using that to block a no-confidence vote, it was pretty controversial.
And then Khan advises the president, Alvi, to dissolve the whole National Assembly.
Article 58, another constitutional power play.
So much happening so fast.
And the Supreme Court's like, whoa, hold up. They take suo moto notice, which means they're stepping in on their own.
Right, and they were not happy.
Nope. Unanimous 5-0 decision, declared all those actions unconstitutional, reinstated the assembly and said, you got to have that vote.
Wow, so the Supreme Court basically put the brakes on all that.
They did. And ultimately, the vote goes ahead and Khan is removed.
First time a Pakistani PM has ever been ousted that way.
Yeah, a real historical moment. And at the same time, you have this public backlash against the military's role in all this.
Right, because there was always this suspicion that the military was kind of behind the scenes orchestrating things.
Exactly, and a lot of public support for Khan, even though he was out.
And what about that diplomatic cable, the one Khan kept claiming proved a U.S. conspiracy?
The Islamabad High Court actually blocked its publication, so that whole thing kind of fizzled out legally.
But the narrative persisted, right?
Oh, yeah. In the public's mind, the idea of a foreign plot definitely stuck around.
And then there's this really concerning issue the article brings up, the alleged targeting of journalists who were critical of the regime change.
Yeah, some big names. Sami Ibrahim, Shahid Arshad Sharif, Imran Riaz Khan, Sabir Shakir. They all face pressure.
And we're not talking just like mean tweets. This is serious stuff.
No, the article talks about legal cases being filed, raids on their homes. Some were even forced to leave the country.
Wow, so a real crackdown on dissent.
Yeah, and the case of Arshad Sharif, that's particularly disturbing.
He was an investigative journalist, right?
Yeah, won awards for his work. He was a big Khan supporter and a vocal critic of the military.
And then he ends up dead in Kenya.
Under very suspicious circumstances, he'd been charged with sedition in Pakistan. His show was banned.
So he flees the country, and then this happens.
It's murky. There were theories flying around. Faisal Vauda, a politician, claimed it was a plot from within Pakistan.
And Khan himself said he knew Sharif's life was in danger.
Yeah, the whole thing is shrouded in mystery. And then you have the director of military intelligence giving this unusual press conference about Sharif's movements.
It's like something out of a spy novel.
It really highlights the risks journalists face in Pakistan, especially when covering these sensitive political topics.
Absolutely. So we've got political instability, allegations of crackdowns, and then, of course, there's the economy, which, if I'm remembering correctly, was not doing so hot.
Yeah, the article paints a pretty bleak picture. The Pakistani rupee was like the worst performing currency in Asia in 2022. And the country was, and kind of still is, on the verge of economic collapse.
And they're linking this directly to the political instability.
They are. They talk about these power asymmetries that favor the unelected elites, like the military and the judiciary.
So these institutions wield a lot of power, even if they're not directly elected.
Exactly. And they can make decisions that have huge economic consequences The article points to that Supreme Court ruling that ousted Hamza Shabazz.
He was the prime minister for a hot minute, right?
Yeah, and then earlier they disqualified like 25 PTI MPs, so these interventions really disrupt things.
I mean, imagine trying to run a business, plan for the future, when the rules of the game keep changing.
It's incredibly difficult, and the article points out that this isn't new. The military and judiciary have a long history of getting involved in politics in Pakistan.
But they also say that Khan's removal via a no-confidence vote was different, potentially a new beginning.
Yeah, because usually it's a coup or the judiciary steps in.
Yeah.
This was, in theory, a more democratic process.
So a tiny sliver of hope, maybe?
Maybe, but there's also this discussion of the hybrid regime experiment in 2018.
What was that all about?
Well, it seemed like the military was trying to boost Pakistan's democratic image by backing this popular leader, Imran Khan.
So kind of having their cake and eating it, too?
Exactly. But then the economy starts tanking under the PTI. The article gives all these stats: GDP growth slowing down, inflation going up, per capita income falling.
Not good.
Not at all. The rupee depreciated, food prices skyrocketed, the stock market was a mess.
So people are getting squeezed, they're feeling the pain.
And the article suggests that this economic downturn led to the military shift towards strategic neutrality, starting around late 2019.
What does that even mean?
It's like they're trying to distance themselves from the political mess, appear less involved.
Damage control?
Could be. They even let Nawaz Sharif, the former PM who they'd basically ousted, leave for medical treatment.
Wow, so a real change in tactic.
Yeah, and there was this big rift between Khan and the military leadership over who should head the ISI, the intelligence agency.
Oh, right. Khan wanted to keep his guy, General Faiz Hamid.
Yeah, allegedly because he thought Hamid might become the next army chief.
So, playing the long game.
Maybe. But the military saw Khan as reckless, especially in foreign policy, too unpredictable.
And meanwhile, the economy is still struggling with these fundamental problems.
Right. They're not investing enough in manufacturing, agriculture, so their exports are weak. They keep running a current account deficit.
Meaning they're buying more from other countries than they're selling.
Exactly. And that puts pressure on the currency, makes it harder to pay for imports, essential stuff.
So you've got everyday people dealing with high inflation, a recession, and then on top of that, there's a shortage of foreign exchange reserves.
It's a recipe for disaster. And you can see why the military might not want to be too closely tied to the government's economic policies.
Right. If those policies are unpopular, they don't want the blame.
Exactly. Strategic neutrality lets them say, hey, this isn't on us.
Smart, but also kind of cynical? No.
Maybe a bit of both. And then there's the whole debt situation, which the article really dives into.
Yeah, I remember those numbers being pretty scary.
They were. External debt hit almost $120 billion by the end of 2021. That's up from $93 billion in 2018.
So a big jump in just a few years.
Yeah, and what's even more concerning is the cost of servicing that debt, the interest payments.
Right, because you got to pay back what you borrow.
Exactly, and it's eating up more and more of the government's revenue. They project it could hit 100% of tax revenue by 2025.
Whoa, so all the taxes they collect would just go to paying off old loans?
That's the worry. And their debt-to-export ratio, it's another indicator, it went from 19% to over 35% in just a few years.
So they're borrowing more and more relative to what they're earning from selling stuff overseas.
Yeah, it's not sustainable, and the breakdown of the debt, it's mostly multilateral and bilateral loans, but they've been taking on more commercial loans recently.
Which usually come with higher interest rates, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like this vicious cycle. And then, as if all that wasn't bad enough, you have the floods in August 2022.
Oh, man, that was devastating. I remember seeing the pictures.
It was a massive disaster. 33 million people affected, over 1,700 deaths. And the poorest communities were hit the hardest.
And it's not just the immediate damage. There's the long-term health impacts, the displacement.
Right, the waterborne diseases, the lack of shelter. It's an ongoing crisis.
And then the economic costs. Billions of dollars in damage, lost crops, destroyed infrastructure.
Yeah, the estimates were over $14 billion in damage, total economic losses around $15 billion, and they need at least $16 billion just for reconstruction.
It's like a double whammy on top of all the other problems.
It really set them back, and it's hard to see how they recover quickly, especially with all the other challenges they're facing.
Speaking of challenges, what about Pakistan's relationship with the U.S.? It seems like that's been a bit of a roller coaster, too.
Yeah, the article talks about how things were relatively good under Trump.
He even offered to mediate on the Kashmir issue, if I recall correctly.
He did, but then things cooled off under Biden, apparently because of policy disagreements.
And then you have Khan's accusations that the U.S. was behind his ouster, which obviously didn't help.
No, not at all. His anti-U.S. rhetoric at those rallies, the focus on Donald Lu, it really poisoned the well.
But the article suggests that some of that might have been political maneuvering on Khan's part.
Yeah, they quote Maleha Lodi, a former Pakistani diplomat, saying Khan was using anti-American sentiment to rally his base, even without solid evidence.
So playing to the crowd, maybe.
It's possible, but it definitely strained the relationship, and then Shahbaz Sharif takes over. He manages to get that IMF bailout.
Which was crucial, right? They were desperate for cash.
They were, but he had to do some unpopular stuff, lift the fuel price caps, and the article argues that all this political infighting makes it much harder to actually fix the economy.
It's like they're trying to rebuild a house while it's on fire.
That's a good analogy, and the article's conclusion is pretty sobering. They basically say Pakistani politicians and military leaders have done a lot of damage to the country.
Wow, strong words.
They paint a picture of chaos, food shortages, an empty treasury. It's pretty dire.
They argue that these messy regime changes have eroded trust between the people and the army.
Especially with those allegations of media harassment, it adds to the sense that things are getting worse.
And the article really highlights the tension between Khan and General Bajwa, the army chief.
Yeah, especially over who gets to appoint the head of the ISI. That was a major power struggle.
And the Constitution says it's the PM's prerogative, right?
It does. But there's this belief that Bajwa actively supported the no-confidence motion against Khan.
So the military flexing its muscles.
It's a complicated relationship. And then you have Shahbaz Sharif. He's seen as a capable administrator.
Based on his time as chief minister of Punjab.
Yeah, but he's also got corruption charges hanging over him, and so do a lot of his cabinet members.
So not exactly squeaky clean.
Nope, and the article even acknowledges that the PTI did some good things economically during the pandemic, but inflation really hurt them.
And then, of course, inflation gets even worse under the PDM.
It's like the average person just can't catch a break, no matter who's in charge.
And the PTI's popularity has actually gone up since Khan's ouster.
Yeah, fueled by this narrative of U.S. interference, it really resonated with people.
And there's this interesting point about Russia. Why isn't Pakistan buying cheaper oil and gas from them like India is?
Good question. The article suggests it might lend credence to those conspiracy theories, even if there's no real evidence.
It's like, if you're not doing what the U.S. wants, are you really independent?
It feeds into that whole narrative, and the article concludes by saying these ideas about foreign plots are becoming more and more accepted in Pakistan.
It's a really, really complicated situation. So we've got political instability, economic turmoil, social unrest, a strained relationship with the U.S.
And this deep sense of powerlessness among ordinary Pakistanis, it's like a perfect storm.
It really is. And, it makes you think, given this history, this fragility, where does Pakistan go from here?
Yeah, can they actually achieve some kind of, stable democracy, get the economy back on track?
And what about external forces, the U.S., China, the IMF? How much influence will they have?
It's a lot to ponder. There are no easy answers. But understanding the complexity is a good first step.
Absolutely. And we hope this deep dive has given you, our listeners, some food for thought, some context to make sense of the headlines.
And maybe spark some curiosity to dig deeper, learn more about this fascinating and challenging country.
Because what happens in Pakistan has ripple effects that go far beyond its borders.
It's a reminder that we're all connected, even in this seemingly chaotic world.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another episode exploring a different corner of the world.
Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.